already. My gosh. When your dad used to post you were such a baby, and now you're so big.
I know, he's just growing like a weed.
Yeah, keep making daddy proud and keep being a good girl.
It always makes me proud. Now, she and her brother were actually just mocking my YouTube channel for
nice.
Dude, it was like, why can't you? My son was like, why can't you make videos of yourself playing Minecraft instead of just like talking to people? That's why is your channel so boring, Dad?
You have officially made it. You are not cool to your kids. By the way, I do not see the poly tax. Please pay the poly tax because we will not have an interview without the poly tax.
Polly, come here. Come here, Goof.
Come on, Sir Wiggles.
Hello, Polly. Oh my God, you're so cute. I can't with him.
He's ridiculous. He's such a ham. Come here. Come here, Goofhead.
Polly.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have Bernadette Giacomazzo on the line with me. Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah. How are ya?
What up?
Everybody in Sool Radio Land, Dan is my friend outside of this, so we're gonna be talking, okay? So
make it happen.
No formalities around here. This is my buddy, this is my pal.
I'm gonna plug you as best I can. Anyway, you know her from her work on TMZ, Hip Hop DX, her work with G Unit, with G-Force Productions. Her book, In Living Color, A Cultural History, is dropping February of next year. Mark your calendars. Pre-order link is in the description. I guess let's start with the book. What compelled you to write a history on In Living Color, which is one of the more genuine, generally speaking, overlooked sketch shows?
Well, that's exactly why I decided to do something on In Living Color. When I had approached Roman and Littlefield about being part of their Cultural History of Television series. The Cultural History of Television series is basically a series where they talk about the impact of different television shows on not just the pop culture zeitgeist, but on how we viewed subsequent television shows in its wake. And they've done things like Northern Exposure and Friends and The Simpsons recently, Star Trek. So there were a lot of television shows that have already been explored prior to In Living Color. But one of the things that I noticed about the cultural history books was that there weren't a lot of Black shows that were talked about and focused on. And frankly, In Living Color is a lot more influential than people give it credit for, especially in the mainstream. One of the biggest things that In Living Color had on the biggest impacts, rather, that it had on the pop culture zeitgeist is the fact that the modern Super Bowl halftime show with all the big celebrities and all the bells and whistles and, when does Michael Jackson perform and Shakira and Jennifer Lopez and this one and Prince and Britney Spears and Aerosmith, that's because In Living Color was on the air. To give the one example that I talk about in the book, the Super Bowl halftime show used to be family fare. It used to be like Dorothy Hamill on an ice skating rink, and nothing wrong with Dorothy Hamill. She's wonderful. She's a great ice skater. She's a big gold medalist. Let's not, shit on Dorothy Hamill here. I mean, it was fine. But it doesn't attract a young crowd. It attracts a certain older, what we know as the boomer crowd today. And
Right.
So as an end result, people used to, during the halftime show, they used to just get up and, walk around, or they would change the television station, or they would just do anything besides stay on the channel that the Super Bowl was airing. So In Living Color comes along, Keenan Ivory Wayans takes a look at this and says, this is a prime opportunity. As they're turning away from the Super Bowl halftime show, they can tune into a live In Living Color show. And they can watch us do these sketches live. And that's exactly what they did. In Living Color, that episode of In Living Color, where it was literally the halftime episode, just smashed ratings records. After the halftime show was over, nobody really went back to the Super Bowl. And the executives stood up and took notice of this, and they were like, we better do something. The next year, they hired Michael Jackson to perform the halftime show, and it's been that way ever since. So if the Super Bowl halftime show, and really in a very big way, the Super Bowl itself is $1 billion industry today, it's because In Living Color helped make it so.
Do you attribute what happened at the halftime show this year with, just the representation of West Coast hip hop? Dr. Dre was there, Snoop, Eminem, 50 Cent. Do you attribute that halftime show to In Living Color's existence?
In some ways, yes. You have to look at just hip hop overall and how it's evolved in even just recent years. Hip hop in the 80s and the 90s, especially when In Living Color was on the air, used to be a very niche genre.
Oh, yeah, it was counterculture.
Yes. And not only that, the term that was used in the mainstream media was urban culture, which is their way of saying the N-word without coming out and saying the N-word, because then that would cause an uproar.
Yeah, it's like how Republicans use the word Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago. And, of course, my favorite from the Supreme Court, which is, replenishing the domestic supply of white babies,
Oh, dear God.
Yeah, mess. But, to get back to this, the In Living Color was one of the only shows that, after especially the second season, started to invite hip hop performers to perform on, toward the end of the show. Queen Latifah performed, Leaders of the New School with Busta Rhymes performed, D Nice, before his quarantine fame, performed on there, because before that he was part of the collective that included KRS-One and Scott LaRock. So he performed. There were a lot of influential hip hop artists that we look at and we say, these are really influential. These are the legends. These are the OGs that were performing on In Living Color. And unlike Yo MTV Raps, which wasn't on during a primetime slot, In Living Color had a devoted audience that maybe, especially if you lived more in like the Midwest, no shades of the Midwest or Chicago or anything like that, but if you lived more in a community that was a lot more rural and a lot less diverse, this was really your first time experiencing hip hop on a major scale. And it stayed with you because you got to see, the hip hop performers, and you got to see the fly girls dressed in what we in Queens think of as like regular B-girl wear, but which was like a foreign concept to people in Iowa somewhere, which, again, no shade to Iowa, but it's not as diverse as New York City or Los Angeles or Miami or Chicago or, Houston and anything like that. So In Living Color, like, put that impression in your heads. And whether you realize it or not, they did it in such a subtle way that you don't even realize today how much it's integrated into the culture. And that's why I decided, look, let's memorialize it and let's show what it is.
Sure. I had the pleasure of reading the beginning of the book that is yet to be released. One thing I really appreciated was your linking Richard Pryor's lesser known and short-lived sketch comedy show to In Living Color as almost a jumping off point. By the time In Living Color begun to air, Richard Pryor was already like at the beginning of the end. It was at the point when he was like in fucking what's that David Lynch movie, Lost Highway, and he already had MS. And how did you feel about the show as a way of carrying on Pryor's legacy when he couldn't necessarily himself?
I honestly couldn't think of a more suitable show to honor Pryor's legacy than In Living Color, to be frank with you. Comedians in general, especially if they have any type of edge to it, they always cite the same, sources over and over again. They always cite the same inspirations. Sure. Pryor, Lenny Bruce, George Carlin, and these are all greats. Yeah. And absolutely, if you're an edgy comedian, you absolutely should study their work as a whole.
Well, most definitely.
And I think that for me, what drew me in and why it made sense that Richard Pryor's show was the jumping off point for In Living Color was the fact that in its time, it wasn't appreciated. Had Richard Pryor's show, and there's Paulie. No, come back, Paulie.
Come here, goof.
Come on, Paulie. Come have a lesson.
All right, keep going. You're good.
But at the time, had Richard Pryor's show been released 20 years later, when In Living Color was on the air, it would have smashed. It would have done what In Living Color did. That's the bottom line. Because if you look at Richard Pryor's sketches from that sketch show, it was almost the straight line is so evident between Richard Pryor and Living Color. It's not even like, there's a detour along the way. It's a straight line. The first Black president sketch, where, that's the most obvious example. Richard Pryor's infamous first Black president sketch, where, he was a more revolutionary Black leader, and, he greeted him with Assalamu alaikum, and, was using terms like blood and, talking about having, Huey Newton in his cabinet. Number one, that predated Obama by almost 40 years. Number two, that is how so many racist Republicans at that time viewed Obama, that this is what he would be like. He would be basically, the Black Panther on steroids, and not the Black Panther superhero, but the Black Panther from the Black Panther movement. Gotcha. And that he would be like, just, this, for lack of a better word, this ultra Black, almost like Black supremacist. And he wasn't. He was, if there's anybody that was a centrist, it was Obama. But then you draw a line to In Living Color's first Black president sketch, and they made it Jesse Jackson. And you see like the similarities. It was almost like, it wasn't like a direct copy and paste, but it's clear that the inspiration was there. And I think especially today, we're missing that, not say we as in Gen X, but the younger generations are missing that template. They are so busy trying to copy one another that they don't know where the template came from.
Right.
And the fact is that In Living Color did know the template, mostly in part because Paul Mooney was one of the writers on both In Living Color and the Richard Pryor show. So Paul Mooney just took what he had over here and he brought it over there, and he just said, this is what we're doing, because now they're ready for this shit. And that's what they did.
Oh, yeah. Pryor wouldn't even host SNL without having Paul Mooney with him.
Absolutely. And do you blame him? Because you got to remember, too, at the time that the SNL writers' room was almost exclusively white. In fact, it was exclusively white. The cast was exclusively white. So, and if you look at the sketches from around that time, it was just pure corny bullshit. Not that it's any better today, but really at that time, it was pure corny bullshit. So why in the hell would you do that, knowing that, your brand of humor is a little bit more on the edge?
Yeah, no, that does make a lot of sense. One thing I really appreciated probably the most about In Living Color was it gave a major, network television platform to comics who either auditioned for SNL and didn't make it, like Jim Carrey, or ones who were on briefly and got fired, like Chris Rock. Mm-hmm. And it wound up, unfortunately for Chris Rock, the show was canceled almost immediately after he got hired. But especially comics like Jim Carrey, like that broke his career. That's where a lot of people saw him first.
Correct. And the thing you have to remember is that In Living Color actually did something that SNL to this day has not been able to do. And that is produce an Oscar winner.
Right.
There have been In Living Color, SNL cast members that have been nominated for Oscars, but none have won. In Living Color was the one that produced Jamie Foxx, who won the Oscar for Ray. But one of the things that we also have to, and even if you look in the writer's room of In Living Color, they gave us Larry Wilmore, who went on to co-create Insecure. They gave us Paul Mooney. They gave us Simpsons writers. They gave us people who went on to do the Drew Carey show. Yep. It was an incubator. Keenan Ivory Wayans, if nothing else, had a keen eye for talent. And he knew, because he was who he was, he could recognize talent when he saw it. And that is something that cannot be overstated. But where Keenan fucked up was, and this is something that even his brother Damon said, in a 2015 interview with the Breakfast Club, where Keenan fucked up at was that he did not have the wherewithal to sign these talents to like his own management or to his own agency or to anything else, because had he done so, he would have been able to continue to capitalize. Because we went over Jim Carrey and Chris Rock and Jamie Foxx and David Allen Greer and all these other talents that he brought into the mainstream. We talked about the writer's room, but let's also look at the Fly Girls. The Fly Girls, you know, we got Carrie Ann Inaba, who is now on Dancing with the Stars. She was a Fly Girl. Jennifer Lopez, the most famous Fly Girl of all. Look at her career. Regardless of what you think of her talent, she's got a career. And these are all things that he could have been capitalizing on had he signed them to his agency.
No, and to J-Lo's credit, she gives credit where it's due. You hear her bring In Living Color up a lot in interviews and establish, like, this is where I made it. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that.
Right. And that is to her credit, because there are many, you know, people that don't acknowledge it. Believe it or not, though Jim Carrey, you know, mentions it from time to time, he does not give the Wayanses or In Living Color the credit that it's due for his career. And in fact, at the time that he was signed, and I go over this in the book, at the time that he was signed, he almost didn't want to join In Living Color. And the executives at Fox had to promise him a much bigger paycheck in order to get him to commit to the show.
I think the last time I saw him really publicly bring it up was over 20 years ago. And it was almost him throwing a shot at it. And I was reminded of this because the 2000 VMAs re-aired on like MTV2 maybe a few months ago when I was flipping channels. And Jim Carrey gets on the stage and he's introducing Eminem. And the show is hosted by Sean and Marlon Wayans. And so they introduce him. He gets on the stage. He goes, "Thank you, Keenan and Damon. I thought you were always the most talented ones."
Bro, why is it even necessary? Especially like when you really think about it, especially in drama, you know, when it comes to actual drama, Marlon has wiped the floor with his brothers. Requiem for a Dream, his recent performance in Respect, you know, the movie that he did with Sofia Coppola, whose name escapes me right now, unfortunately. But Marlon is the most diverse and versatile actor of all the Wayans family.
Oh, by a wide margin.
Yeah, by a very wide margin. So just because like Sean and Marlon came on towards the, you know, the third season, you know, because Sean, remember, he was the DJ, he was SW1, and then he eventually transitioned over and DJ Twist took over. Marlon came on later because he was the baby of the family. But even with all that, even if that's what you really thought, like, why would you say it? Like, what would possess you? That is still his brothers. That is still his family. Like,
those are the people who put him on.
Shit. Right. You know, and that type of shade, and you'll see throughout the book that it wasn't the first time that Carrey threw shade at it, because he's been throwing shade since the 90s at it. Like, he always felt, almost in a way, you got the sense that he felt that it was beneath him. And it's like, dude, if it weren't for them, you wouldn't be where you are today. No. And now look where you are. Now you're known as a fucking vaccine denialist and, you know, a conspiracy theorist and a dude who just does weird paintings.
Yeah. No, he's one of those people where I realized how much I have to separate the art from the artist to truly appreciate him. Because I think his dramatic work is probably some of the best too. Like, you can't knock Man on the Moon. You can't knock Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I thought the show he produced that only ran for 2 seasons, I'm Dying Up Here, which was based around the 1970s comedy scene in LA, is one of the best like TV dramas that came out in the last 10 years. And I thought it was a shame that nobody watched it.
Right. I mean, and look, nobody's denying the man is talented. Yeah. But do you know how many talented people there are that never make it, per se, because they either burn their bridges or they don't have the access or whatever the case may be? Talent does not necessarily equal fame. How many untalented people are famous right now? Really, in the era of Instagram and TikTok and all that other bullshit, how many untalented people are famous right now? Absolutely. How many talented people, wallow in obscurity and barely make ends meet? So talent does not equal fame.
No.
If you have both, you better be grateful to whatever God you believe in, and to whatever person gave you that break, every day of your life. Not to say you should necessarily kiss the ground that Keenan Ivory Wayans walks on, but you know what? Saying thank you without throwing shade wouldn't hurt you.
Sure. So I want to talk about where you and I initially met. Yeah, I know. See where I'm going with this?
Nice segue.
I'm just going to say this shit publicly. A lot of my biggest interviews come from my initially meeting you. Like I've had a bunch of people from the cast of The Sopranos on for long form interviews, especially during the pandemic. And that wouldn't have happened if you didn't give me the time of day way back when in 2019 and gave me a press pass to SopranosCon. And like, thank you so much for that. Like you're always good with me for.
I appreciate that. But I think that it also bears noting that we knew of each other, though we didn't know each other per se prior to that, because we were on the Comic-Con circuit together. And always in Comic-Cons, like you run into one another a lot.
And we were both working with Justin Hunt at the time. So he probably mentioned me to you and mentioned you to
me. Exactly. The world of journalism, like every other world in the entertainment industry, is really small. And so eventually you're going to run into the same people. Sure. So it doesn't pay to be an asshole, frankly.
No, I mean, it kind of does sometimes, but you really have to pick your battles and be mad calculated about it. For sure.
But for the most part, the default setting should not be, I'm an asshole. That's all I'm saying. Now, if you have to be an asshole to reinforce your boundaries, that's a different story. By all means, I will cheer on that asshole away.
Oh, yeah, that's the only way to use it.
Right. But yeah, that is how we formally started speaking more with one another, was because you had approached me for the SopranosCon pass, and I said yes, and here we are today. So
here we are. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if actually my most viewed video is from that convention is when I'm interviewing Federico Castelluccio, who played Furio famously.
He is no longer part of the SopranosCon crowd. He had came out on Instagram and publicly disassociated himself from Joe Fama.
Do you want to elaborate on why you think that is?
Well, do I know the ins and outs of why particularly they fell out? No, I don't. Do I know why other people fell out, including myself and other people who were behind the scenes with these folks? Yes. And do I want to elaborate? Yes. Let me start by saying this. When I was approached to do SopranosCon's publicity, it was 3 months prior to date of launch. The investor in the SopranosCon who had approached me was a friend of my friend, Albie Manzo from The Real Housewives.
Okay.
And Albie was the one who said to me, listen, this is a friend of my father's. You got to do me a favor. He's invested in this. I was like, Albie, listen, I love you to death. I do, Albie. But I'll be frank with you. I hadn't watched an episode of The Sopranos because it was not allowed in my house. Huh. Not because of anything in particular, like, the subject matter. No. We had HBO.
Right.
But my dad was who he was. And I'm not going to get into that because, frankly, he's dead. He's not here to defend himself. But Google is everybody's friend. And by all means, I invite you to Google who my dad was and what he did. So he knew that world better than anybody else.
Gotcha.
And frankly, he knew that it was, let's call it what it is. It is a mafioso cosplay. You can say what you want about David Chase's story writing or storylines or whatever the case may be, and you're entitled to your opinion. But as far as he was concerned, that shit did not fly in his house. And I don't blame him. So he was like, so of course I go back to Albie and tell him this. And he's like, please, you got to do me this favor. It's really, really, a bad thing and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, fine. But I got to find another angle to do this because I don't know that the Sopranos thing will necessarily sell it. So I met with Mike Motta, who was one of the co-founders of SopranosCon. And let me be clear in saying this. I know that there are some people who have their opinions of Mike Motta, And I understand why they have their opinions of Mike Mata. However, he's no more or less what you would normally see in the entertainment industry. I understood, being a veteran of the game, that this was the game. Okay. Sure. You charge it to the game. You don't get your feelings involved.
No.
You don't get personal. This is the game. This is the player. And this is what you're going to do. So I don't have, we only have 10 minutes left. So I'm going to make this very quick.
Sure.
To make a long story extremely short, I did what I did. Obviously, SopranosCon gets the huge press that it gets. It gets exploding with press. But the issue that I started running into was that one of the co-founders, Joe Fama, felt like he was being overlooked. And that wasn't the case. The issue of the case was that every time I tried to approach Joe with a press opportunity, his answer was, I'm busy, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Or he would just be flat out nasty. And at a certain point, if I feel like I'm bothering you, I'm just going to walk away. So if I'm telling you that the press is outside, or, in the case of the New York Post, because Cindy Adams from the New York Post showed up to SopranosCon, and she wrote about them, and she wrote Mike Mata and Dan Trader were the co-founders. No mention of Joe Fama. That's kind of a slight, and I can understand why he felt slighted, but let's be real, Joe. Why did that happen? Because when I approached you in the back room to come out and say hello to Cindy Adams, your answer, as you were smoking your cigarette and blowing the smoke in my face, was, I'm busy, go the fuck away, leave me the fuck alone, I know who the fuck you think you're talking to. Cool, motherfucker, now I'm going to show you who the fuck you're talking to. So the long and the short of it is, especially Joe Fama, he is extremely, extremely unprofessional. There's only but so much you can deal with that bullshit before you finally say enough is enough. I reached that limit. Other people reach that limit, and whatever other issues there may have been, that right there, that lack of respect for somebody who's actually putting their career on the line and their name on the line for your bullshit, knowing that without her, you would be not even selling 1,000 tickets, because let's be real, how well did the next SopranosCon that I wasn't involved in do? Let's go there, shall we? So
I think most people have to Google the second one to make sure it exists.
Exactly my point. So all that bullshit, all that wannabe mafioso shit, I'm Joe Fama, don't you know who the fuck I am? How far did it get you, sir? How far did it get you?
It was the convention, and it was dealing with a lot of people at the convention that made me realize, The Sopranos is and always will be my favorite show of all time. But I'm also that kid who was slightly smarter than average and got bullied all the fucking time, and I was never into the mafioso end. I could watch any gangster movie set in the 50s with people beating other people with doo-wop music in the background while Nick's getting impeached.
Right.
But what stood out for me with the show was, the psychological aspect, the Lynchian horror aspect, the amazing performances, and just the quieter moments where you have to sit back and realize you're empathizing for sociopaths, because at the end of the day, they have human problems at all. I love the theme that is being more explored in real life now, that the American dream is fucking unattainable. Exactly.
And that's the nuance that people seem to miss. Why do people like the Joker so much? Because everybody knows that all it takes is one bad day. Mm-hmm. Everybody is one bad day away from being a total fucking lunatic. That's the reality. And to be fair, too, James Gandolfini's family and James, by their own admission, Gandolfini was not like that. He was not Tony Soprano in real life.
No.
Tony Soprano is a fictional character. And speaking from my own personal observations from within my family, Tony Soprano wouldn't last past the first episode if he was a real life mafioso character. Because the mafiosos that I know, especially who were of that generation, they were cool, calm, collected. They worked best way to describe it. They work more like the NYPD ESU, the Emergency Services Unit, which is the elite task force. They work like them more than they do like a bunch of wild gangs of criminals. That's why they were so successful. That's why they were making so much money. Because if they acted wild and crazy or like the wannabe like Joe Fama thought he was, they'd be broke like Joe Fama, but they weren't. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, I mean, it's... And he kind of heard something similar, in the hip hop realm back in the 90s when Biggie and Tupac died, when that discussion of what's more attractive, actually being the person people say they are, or playing the role on a surface level.
Cool G Rap was one of my first ever hip hop clients. And he said to me, you can either be a gangster, or you can be a rapper, but you can't be both. And anybody who knew Tupac, especially, will tell you that he didn't start out with this gangster rap shit. If anything, and if you even listen to Jada Pinkett Smith, I know people make fun of her, and I know people say, she really wishes she married Tupac. There's a reason for that. There's a reason she still has love for him after all these years. It's because he wasn't, this hype dude. He was sensitive. He was intelligent. He was very much a prophet. He thought of things, and all you have to do is read his poetry to realize that this man was not, this jump up wannabe hip hop dude. He was a poet. That's what he was at his heart and his soul. And I think that that's worth considering, that who you remember longer and who you respect for more is the one that's like you, that's like me, that's a thinker, that's a doer, that's about shit, that does things. I'm in this business more than 20 years. Do you know how many of my colleagues I came up with that were far more talented than me, that were prettier, that had more connections, that just, had all these things that I didn't have, but they fell away because they couldn't maintain it. Because you can't be a supernova. You can't. You've got to be a planet. You've got to be consistent.
Oh yeah, talent, for better or for worse, is almost beside the point. It's more about consistency. It's more about work ethic. Why do you think Gucci Mane got so successful and like Saigon didn't?
Exactly, because he just kept doing at it. And I think, to wrap it up, because I know we only have 2 minutes and 55 seconds.
Oh shit, yeah, you're right about that.
That's what I think that we have to take away from In Living Color. We have to take away from the fact that the reason why it's still cited as such an influential show is because, yes, there was talent there, no question about it. Yes, it was funny, no question about it. A lot of these sketches still uphold the test of time, no question about it. But the people who came from that show that are successful today just continued at it. Keenen Ivory Wayans is still making movies today, not as much as he used to. He's still writing TV shows, not as much as he used to. I mean, the man is
doesn't have to anymore.
No, he doesn't. First of all, he doesn't have to. He did what he did. But the man is in his 60s. Give him a break, will you? Yeah. But they just kept going at it. And now that helps the next generation. And that's what you have to, especially at our age now, look at. We are now at an age where we are influencing the next generation. They're looking to us and they're saying, what should we do to be like you? And you have to guide them accordingly. You cannot lead them astray, or as best you can. You can't give them false information. You have to give them the best information that you have and that you know how. And you got to teach them the good and the bad, the mistakes you made and the things that you did right. And that's really all you can do.
Absolutely. All right. Where can we find you online, Bernadette?
You can find me at on my website, www.BernadetteGiacomazzo.com. Find me on Twitter at BG Writes, WRITES stuff, STUFF. On Instagram at BG_takes_pics. I am very easy to find. Stop by, say hello, DM me for tips, friendship, SEO ideas, and to talk about the golden age of hip hop. I'm always open for a good discussion. But just remember, if you start something with me, I'm going to finish it, because I don't like drama, I don't like games, and I don't like any type of, online unnecessariness. So
which is why
don't get blocked. Do not get blocked is all I'm going to tell you.